Hello, and a very warm welcome to the health webinar brought to you by JKYog and Radhakrishna Temple of Dallas. As COVID-19 infections soar globally and the world awaits the release of the COVID-19 vaccine, some of the common questions that come up are: how safe and effective is the vaccine? What are some of the side effects to be aware of? How many doses will an adult need, etc.? To address this and educate us about today's topic of the adult immunizations and vaccines, we have with us infectious disease specialist Dr. Satish Mocherla. Dr. Mocherla completed his residency in internal medicine at Medical College of Ohio and infectious disease fellowship at the University of Indiana. In 2019, he joined UT Southwestern Medical Center in Dallas, Texas, as a full-time faculty member. He has over 20 years of experience in infectious diseases with a strong focus in HIV care and endemic fungal infections, and is passionate about working with underserved and minority populations. Recently, he has been conducting clinical trials for treatment of COVID-19 under the mentorship of Dr. Mamta Jain, Professor of Infectious Diseases at UT Southwestern. A quick note before we get started: we will have a brief Q&A after the presentation. So if you have any questions, go ahead and submit your questions in the chat window. With that, I am delighted to welcome Dr. Mocherla.
Thanks, everyone. Namaskar. Thanks for having me talk about the vaccines. And we'll go ahead and get started. When I started infectious disease work, I was very keen on working with HIV and fungal infections. Slowly things evolved. The HIV epidemic came under control, and we started talking more about prevention of disease, and that's where some of my interest in vaccines has come from. I've really not worked with any vaccine trials, to be honest with you, but I have learned so much after the COVID epidemic has started, which has now become a pandemic. So the information in this talk is mostly from internet, from my colleagues, and the WHO websites, and of course you can always find anything on the Google. So immunity index 001, because this is very, very basic. So antibodies are products which your body makes to fight infections, and this ability to fight infection is called immunity. Active immunity is what a person makes of the virus or bacteria or fungus when it's presented to the body, and those are called antibodies, which confer active immunity. And vaccines give you active immunity. Passive immunity is that concept is that when antibodies are transferred to a person, either from a mother to child or by transfusion of these antibodies via serum, plasma, and etc. The process of offering protection against the microbes is called immunization. Vaccination in general refers to allowing person to make antibodies on its own. So if we're going back into history, a few milestones, vaccination is not actually as recent as we think it is. The scholars have found evidence of the use of smallpox inoculation in China as early as 1000 CE, and also in Turkey and Africa. The whole concept of vaccination, the pivotal work was done by Edward Jenner in 1796 when he used the cowpox to prevent smallpox vaccine. In 1885, Louis Pasteur made the rabies vaccine, which was a huge step in prevention of disease and reduce mortality for patients infected with rabies, on prevention of rabies. In 1926, we had the BCG vaccine. Interestingly, the BCG vaccine was initially an oral vaccine. It was given to infants, And then it fell into some kind of a dispute and disrepute when a large cohort of patients developed the tuberculosis. When they were given this vaccine, a huge inquiry was conducted, and finally it was discovered there was a cross-contamination with a live TB bacteria, and that's why the children got infected with the tuberculosis bacteria, not due to the vaccine itself. The 1930s saw rapid development of antitoxins. Vaccines against diphtheria, plague, cholera, anthrax, and typhoid came into being. And in 1953, we had the famous Salk polio vaccine, which is an inactivated vaccine, and then followed a few years later by the Seven's Live attenuated vaccine. So the 3 R's of immunization are those which are considered the routine immunization, which most of us should get, required immunizations, which we have to get when we go to a place of travel, worship, etc. And then lastly, we have recommended vaccinations, which are recommended by health authorities, and it's really up to the person whether he or she accepts the recommendation or not. So let us look at some of the transmission of infectious diseases and some of the available vaccines. So for respiratory illnesses, we have the influenza, we have diphtheria, we have the SARS-CoV-2 now, not yet available. Then we have the pneumococcal vaccine, and of course we have the TB skin testing and the BCG vaccine, which is a MON2, the skin testing which comes out of the MON2 test, and the BCG vaccine, which prevents tuberculosis, which is usually inhaled. Then from the physical contact side, we have tetanus, we have hepatitis B, we have rabies, anthrax with the military and special circumstances, and other vaccines which can be foodborne or respiratory droplet precautions, and also some of the contact like varicella vaccine or the chickenpox vaccine. Now this slide is a busy slide, and this is just give you an example of what are the adult vaccine recommendations as offered by the CDC. So the ones in yellow are those vaccines which are for adults who meet 8 requirement and with all who lack documentation of vaccination or lack evidence of past infection. The ones in the purple are those vaccines that are recommended for adults with an additional risk factor. For example, you have HIV, or you are recovering from a serious cancer-related illness, or you have a defective immune system. And then the ones in blue are the vaccines which are based on shared decision clinical. That means that you and your doctor have this conversation and weigh out the risks and benefits of vaccine, and you take the vaccine. So the influenza vaccine is a very important vaccine, and you have I'll talk a little bit more about this. You have inactivated vaccines, which are inactivated influenza recombinant vaccines. These are not live vaccines, and you have the live vaccine. And then you have the tetanus, diphtheria, mumps, measles, and rubella, the chickenpox, and the zoster vaccine, which is available both as live and recombinant vaccine. Then some other vaccines, which is also recommended by the CDC, is the HPV vaccine, which prevents human papillomavirus, which is a sexually transmitted disease. And you have the pneumococcal vaccine, which is 2 kinds of vaccines. You have hepatitis A, you have hepatitis B. You have meningococcal vaccine, which prevents bacterial meningitis, 2 kinds, the ACWY vaccine and the meningococcal B vaccine. And then, of course, you have the Haemophilus influenza vaccine. So often it's asked, okay, doc, I get the vaccine, how well am I protected? So this is a chart which shows you the protection and efficacy of the vaccine. So when you talk about efficacy of vaccine, it's important that number 1, you shouldn't get sick with the disease, and number 2, the transmission of disease also should fall. That is what an ideal vaccine will be. So if you look at tetanus, is not communicable disease, right? You can't give another person tetanus. But if you take the tetanus vaccine, it prevents you from getting tetanus, and look at this rate, more than 99%. Then comes along diphtheria, which is definitely person-to-person transmitted, and it has got an 80 to 95% efficacy. Pertussis, which is a whooping cough vaccine, is 90% effective for severe illness. Of course, you can get a mild illness, but it prevents you from getting severe illness. Look at polio, more than 90%. Look at the measles, mumps, rubella, more than 90%. Yellow fever, 100%. So vaccines are good things. I know there's a huge body of anti-vaxxers, as they call themselves, but when you look at the entire big, broad picture, I think vaccines are the way to go. Mentioned about the hepatitis A vaccine, typically this is a two-dose vaccine, and most vaccines take a little bit of time, anywhere between 3 days to 14 days for really to act. But hepatitis A vaccine, which is so immunogenic, it means that it can produce immunity, is so high that it is recommended to take it even a day before travel if you're not vaccinated against hepatitis A in the past. Then hepatitis B, which is usually transmitted sexually or by injection needles or some other means of body fluid contact, has got a 95% vaccine. Now typhoid, oral or injection, however, falls off the grid a little bit. It's only 60 to 70% vaccine. Now rabies, to prevent it, and we'll come back to it later, has got 100% efficacy when you give it along with the rabies immunoglobulin after exposure. JVE is Japanese virus encephalitis. Influenza. Now, influenza has an interesting history. So, if you look at the efficacy of influenza vaccines, one of the things you might have heard is, did we get the vaccine right for this year? So, what does that mean? It means that the circulating strain of the influenza during that particular period in that particular continent or hemisphere should match the vaccine which the components are made of. So typically the influenza vaccine is made of minimum of 3 different kinds of vaccines. You have one strain of influenza A, 1 or 2 strains of influenza B, and 1 strain of H1N1. So H1N1 is universal, and what you need to get right is your influenza A strain and B strain, and I'll talk about that a little bit more, how this is done as we go along. Pneumococcal vaccine is 60% efficacy, but on the other hand, invasive pneumococcal disease has got a very high mortality of almost 60 to 100% mortality, depending on whether you get pneumococcal pneumonia, which spreads into your lungs, heart, brain. You can get very, very sick with pneumococcal disease. So that is why, though it has a 60% overall efficacy, we do promote the use of pneumococcal vaccine. Now, what about SARS-CoV-2 vaccine? So this is a new vaccine. The phase 3 trials have been completed in 2 different vaccines here, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. That is being claimed as having been 91 to 95% efficacy. So it is here. What is here? The winter is coming. This slide is for our Game of Thrones fans. And winter, if you remember in Game of Thrones, is dark, it's foreboding, and you get into problems because there's overcrowding, you cannot go and exercise, people stay indoors, they tend to congregate, and there is active spread of respiratory illnesses. So what happens in winter? You get respiratory illnesses. Then you have pneumonias. Then along comes influenza. Then now we have COVID-19, and lastly and most dreaded of them all is that you can have combinations of any of these or all of them together. So this season is a very important season for us. 2020 is an important year, and we are really recommending that everyone gets vaccinated for pneumonia, for elderly people and those people who require vaccination because of certain underlying illnesses. And definitely anyone over the age of 6 months should get the influenza vaccine. Okay. So let's talk about pneumococcal pneumonia vaccines. So who gets it? So all adults more than 65 years of age should get the vaccine. Younger adults more than 19 years of age with special conditions. Those patients who have immunocompromised conditions like cancer, HIV, rheumatoid arthritis, diabetes, heart, lung, kidney conditions, people without any spleen, either because they had the spleen removed for some reason, or they were born without spleen, or they're functional asplenia where the spleen cannot work. Then those patients who have got cochlear implants or who have had leaks from the CSF fluid, they need the vaccine. So we have two vaccines out there. For ideal and optimal immunity, you should get both the vaccines. Traditionally, you get the PCV13 or Prevnar 13. It's a pneumococcal conjugate vaccine, followed by polysaccharide vaccine, which is a 23-valent vaccine. So if you combine these two vaccines, you get protection against 36 serovars. There are many other serovars, but if you get these major serovars and you get infected with some other variant of the pneumococcal strain, it will still protect you. And that is the method in the madness. Okay, now we come to the pneumococcal vaccine. So who gets it? So persons age 6 months or older, dose of any influenza vaccine. So the FDA does not recommend one vaccine over other. We have multiple vaccines, and I'll come to that in just in a second. And in special situation, it's often asked, what should we do if we have egg allergy? Because the most commonly available vaccines are grown in eggs. If you have only hives, one dose of influenza vaccine annually, it doesn't matter, you can be just observed. If you have allergy more than hives, they say that you can get one dose of any influenza vaccine appropriate for age and health status in a medical setting under supervision of the healthcare provider who can recognize and manage allergic reactions. What does it mean? That if you have severe egg allergies, don't go to your friendly neighborhood CVS pharmacy and get it, because if you have a severe reaction, there may not be a healthcare provider available to take care of serious allergic reactions. That's what that means. So the pneumonia vaccine is available as number one, I said, vaccine which is grown in eggs, which is inactivated vaccine. We have another vaccine which is called recombinant vaccine, where the DNA is modified and is used to produce the vaccine. And then you have cell line vaccines where the virus is grown in mammalian cell lines and then the vaccine is prepared. So you do have 3 inactivated vaccines, and then you have one live influenza vaccine. So the live influenza vaccine is available as a spray, and you should not get this vaccine, of course, if you're severely immunocompromised, because this is a live vaccine, it can cause severe disease, should not have anatomic or functional ischemia, that is, your spleen is gone or not working, cochlear implant patients, pregnancy, and those patients who have received influenza viral medications within the 48 hours. You can take the viral medications for influenza and get the inactivated vaccine, but you can't get the live activated vaccine because it will just not work. Then Guillain-Barré syndrome is a syndrome which is where you have ascending paralysis. So if you ever have that vaccine within 6 weeks of previous dose of influenza vaccine, you should not give the live vaccine, and definitely you should think twice about giving the inactivated vaccine in those patients who have been having or have a history of Guillain-Barré syndrome. So again, this is another slide which I was alluding to, what is available. We have the inactivated influenza vaccine, we have the recombinant influenza vaccine, with a live attenuated influenza vaccine. The most commonly available vaccine this year is an inactivated quadrivalent influenza vaccine, 4 strains, influenza A H1H1, H1N1, influenza A H3N2 virus, and 2 influenza B viruses. So how is this made? So though influenza is considered to be occurring only in winters, actually there's 2 kinds of influenza. There's a background influenza which occurs throughout the year, and there's a seasonal influenza which occurs during the season. So there are laboratories throughout the world who will collect all these viruses which occurs in the northern hemisphere, southern hemisphere, even pool this, and they have mathematical models, and they can have some idea of what is going to be a significant outbreak this year. Because winter occurs earlier in the southern hemisphere, often, and then those viruses will cross over the northern hemisphere. The vaccines are typically, they start making the vaccine somewhere in early April to June, and then they get the strain, they hope they get the strain right, and then they will give the strain to the vaccine laboratory saying that this is what we predict, and the laboratories will make this. It's pretty fascinating actually. The most common vaccines, of course, are the egg-based vaccines, and we talked about this. Cell-based vaccines, they are egg-free, and the recombinant vaccines also, which are egg-free. The live vaccines are only available as egg-based vaccines, and they should not be given to pregnant women and certain populations, which I told you about in the previous slide. So changing tracks. We'll take a little break from the regular mundane stuff and go to something slightly more exotic. So, history always tends to repeat itself. Unfortunately, as human beings, our memories are short and we forget. We got SARS-CoV, which was a serious respiratory illness in 2002 to 2003. Remember that? It came in Hong Kong. It went to Canada, different parts of the world. It was a really, really bad, serious respiratory illness we had at that time. Then we got MERS-CoV. Now, it's not politically correct to label a disease based on geographical distribution, right? What if I lived in a country and you say, oh, you're from the country where this so-and-so disease came from. So you got the X disease from X country. But so MERS, unfortunately, we do not have a very good name for it. So it is still called as Middle East Respiratory Illness Syndrome, or MERS. COVID-2 became coronavirus 2 vaccine. So and this epidemic is still going on because the host, the dromedary camels, they do carry this virus within them, and there is a subclinical circulation which is occurring in these camels. And then now we have 2019 novel coronavirus or the COVID. Scanning electron microscope image. This is the the pink, the bluish pink is a virus which is coming out of the surface of the cells. So this is a picture which all of us dread seeing. So a 101 on coronaviruses. So what are these? These are enveloped viruses. They are RNA viruses. They are zoonotic. What does that mean? They occur in animals, mammals and birds, and of course bats. Then they are upper respiratory tract infections. They are the place where they usually cause problems. So these are possible colds, coughs, trachea, and then the more serious ones will cause your pneumonias. So these are the common viruses: HKU1, NL63, 229E, and OC45. So if you do a nasal smear on patients with a respiratory tract illness, and you put them on a panel, there's a panel available. It's a PCR test which picks up these molecular markers of these viruses are commonly seen. There is no effective treatment. It's largely supported as a broad range. There's no effective vaccination against this group of viruses. But times have changed. So we do think that we have an effective vaccination. And this slide obviously needs to be rewritten, but this was written as for a coronavirus 101. We do not have an effective treatment yet because we know that there are certain drugs approved, and most of the other drugs are still experimental for coronavirus, the COVID-19 virus at least. Okay. So this slide is a busy slide. I'll walk you through it real quick. This differentiates between the three coronaviruses which we all dread: the initial severe acute respiratory illness coronavirus, original coronavirus infection, followed by the MERS, which is the Middle East respiratory severe respiratory syndrome, and then you have the COVID. So these are years of outbreak. As you see, this outbreak was stopped. They found that the host was an intermediate host, a civet cat. The country where it came from, they eradicated the cat population and stopped the spread. Unfortunately, you can't do that with camels because camels are a very important animal in the Middle East. They are used just like for transport, and they are kept in the houses. So you just can't go and kill off all the camels that are there in the Middle East, right? And then unfortunately here, this has become a mystery. We know the primary reservoir is bad, but we don't know what is going on. Is there an intermediate reservoir or not? We do not know that. Now, for the SARS-CoV and the SARS-CoV-2, which is a COVID, the transmission is quite efficient. Now, this is a slightly older slide from the original publication, and now it's no longer considered to be possibly efficient. It is actually quite efficient. The pandemic potential, obviously we know we are in the middle of a pandemic. It is pandemic. MERS is not, does not have a pandemic potential. And is it contained? The MERS is not contained, and the SARS-CoV-2 or the COVID is definitely not contained. The incubation period is about the same, slightly sooner in the SARS-CoV, and in the SARS-CoV-2, which is a COVID, it is 1 to 14 days. Pneumonia is common in SARS-CoV-2, extremely common in the SARS-CoV, the original vaccine. So the case fatality ratio, which is how many patients get infected, how many patients will die, is very high in MERS, 34%, whereas here, as a broad range, in the COVID, it's 1 to 4% in confirmed cases to date, but there are huge regional differences. For example, the mortality rate in England or UK is different from US, that is different from certain areas in Mexico, it was different in Iran, it was different in Italy. So there are case-to-case regional differences. So there's no one-size-fits-all prediction as far as fatality rate goes. So this is an interesting slide. When I'd given this talk months before in the temple, I had taken the screenshots. Where this was on 24th of February, actually, not too long ago, just about 9 months ago. We had a total of 80,000 cases. At that time, US had only 53 cases in US. The total deaths were 2,699. If you see the map of Southeast Asia, it was mostly all concentrated in China and Southeast Asia. So let us go to the next one. So here, this was on 3/1, where there was small bump in US. You started seeing these spots in Europe. You started seeing these spots in United States. There was only one death in Seattle, Washington, which occurred. There were 7 patients which were reported in March of 2001. Just 7 were reported. And total confirmed cases was 77, which was up in 1 week's time from 53 to 77. Now, this doesn't look like a big number, but you see the ratio, you went from 53 to 70%, 77, 14% increase or a 25% increase, right? So that's a rough indicator of how quickly this is occurring. So sometimes these numbers when you look at doesn't seem to make sense, but the statisticians and the epidemiologists get very alarmed when they see things like this. Now let's go to the next slide. This is from March. First, again, you went to 87,000 total confirmed cases. The death toll was 2,990. Total recovered was 42,000. Now, unfortunately, this is where we are. It's a very sobering and a very sad graph to look at. This is 2 days ago, 56 million. So we went from 80,000 9 months ago to 56 million. Global deaths from just under 3,000 to 1.3 million. And look at United States, where we were somewhere in the middle bottom of the chart. We have unfortunately, it breaks my heart to say this, sorry, I just get emotional because I've done so much COVID. It's hard for me to say. Give me a second, sorry. Okay, so we have 11 million patients. Very, very sobering and very sad data to look at. So going back to the nitty-gritty, how is the virus spread between people who are in close contact within about 6 feet? Respiratory droplets when person coughs or sneezes, and of course it can be also you can get by touching surface which has virus on it and touching their mouth, nose, and possibly the eyes. This is where that shield comes into being, because the shield you can leak around the shield, but inadvertently many studies have shown, especially in staph infection studies, that when you touch the surface and touch your face, that occurs almost like 80 times in a day. So that's where your shield, when you wear it and you have the mask on, you inadvertently don't self-inoculate or inoculate your face from there. And it's very important to know this is a good thing. It is not passed from mother to fetus. Okay, so modes of transmission. This is another picture which shows the large infectious droplets are 1 to 3 feet, small infectious droplets are 3 to 5 feet, and airborne is anywhere between 5 to 60 feet. Remember in the beginning we kept saying it's not airborne, it's not airborne. So many studies have actually cast doubt on that, because if you say if it is 5 to 160 feet is airborne, you are at 6 feet. So yes, there is a concern. However, for all practical purposes, the airborne transmission occurs when you're doing procedures, you're taking nebulizers. So that becomes very, very important at that point. So that is a small thing I wanted to say, that don't let your guard down. 6 feet means 6 feet. Stick to that 6 feet. So now switching gears and let us talk about vaccines. I'm sure everybody's keen to listen to this. So we have these two vaccines which you're hearing a lot about in papers are called mRNA vaccines. So up till this time, mRNA vaccines were only studied in labs and in small human studies, but they've never been commercially licensed for use. So what is the method they're using? So the DNA, it stores the instructions for proteins and nucleus. This is just basic. The RNA, or the messenger RNA, is a temporary set of instructions per cell to make a protein, and the mRNA is made using the DNA. When the mRNA makes the protein, then the protein is then released, and this protein is what we are going to use to make the body make the vaccine. So this is what is the immunogenic part of the particle which is used to stimulate your body to make the vaccine. So the traditional vaccine and mRNA vaccine. So in the components in a traditional vaccine, let's go to the traditional vaccine first, because it's always good to hear and learn about history. So in the traditional vaccine, your components are microbial protein or an inactive microbe. Okay. So it means that you've killed the virus or you killed the bacteria. Now you're giving the whole bacteria or parts of the bacteria and trying to stimulate the body to make it. The production in this traditional vaccine takes slower. It's hard to produce in the lab. It's commercially available, so it takes a long process. In the mRNA vaccine, the components are blueprints of the protein. So you're actually giving the blueprint to the body and say, here's the blueprint, please make this protein. So you've bypassed this whole step and you've gone directly from stimulating the body to try to recognize the protein and then wonder what to do with it to directly starting to make the vaccine. So that is why this is much faster. It's also faster because mRNA molecules are very easy to make in the lab and you can have mass productions very quickly. But in the end, both vaccines ultimately teach the body to make make protection against itself. So the end result is the same. It's how you get there. It's like this, like whether you can run at 100 miles an hour and complete a race, or you can go slow and steady and still win the race, but have a lot of problems during that time of winning the race and having a problem with obstacles during the race and things like that. So think of it like a fast-paced race versus a slow and a steady race. At this time, because if you see those other pictures, 9 months it took us from going from under 3,000 cases to so many millions of cases. We do not have time on our side. There's no time for slow and steady here. We need to work fast, and that's where these vaccines are coming into being. So the Moderna vaccine for COVID, how did this work? So this is very similar to the vaccine the Pfizer is making. And so you have the spike protein encoded mRNA that's made in the lab. You give it to the person. The ribosomes pick this mRNA protein. It's all happening in your body. The the body takes this Golgi apparatus called endoplasmic reticulum, and then it makes the reticulum makes the SARS-CoV protein, and then the protein makes a primer. Okay, so this is how this is made. So the next few slides are from a dear colleague of mine, Dr. Ruben Ratnam. Sorry, can you mute me for a second? I'm having some disturbance. Are we on? I'm sharing the tray.
Yes,
Yes,
you're on. Yes, doctor, you're on.
I can't see my slides. Okay, sorry about that. I apologize. The next few slides are from a dear colleague of mine, Dr. Ruben Ratnam, and he is becoming quite well known in the UT system. He has done a lot of work with the vaccines, and he has allowed me to share some of his slides. Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
You cannot?
We can.
Okay, great. And you can see the slides?
Yes.
Okay, great.
Yes.
So this is a pictorial where we have about 220 vaccine candidates, believe it or not. So here is a picture. We have the DNA vaccines. We have a viral vector vaccine where you pick up a virus which is not considered to be very harmful. You put this mRNA inside the virus, give the virus to the person. The virus gets into the person's body. The virus releases this mRNA that is picked up by your cells called antigen presenting cells, and your body will make the vaccine. Here you have the attenuated virus where the virus is weakened and you give it. You have the inactivated virus, and you have a protein subunit virus. So these are the various vaccine candidates, and these are the pathways the vaccine is being made. So what are the phase 3 clinical trials available in USA? So we have the Moderna vaccine I just talked to you a little bit about. So enrollment is complete. The interim results have already come out. This is a slightly old slide, and I'll give you that in a second. We have the Pfizer vaccine. Enrollment is complete. The interim results are out, and both these are in the process of getting the EUA approved. Moderna is already approved, so that's where we are at. Then the AstraZeneca and University of Oxford, this is where the adenovirus or the chimp vector vaccine came from. So this trial went into hold because there was a problem, and it has now been unheld, and they are still enrolling, and we expect the results to come out by the end of the year. The Janssen is another adenoviral vector, and again, this went into clinical holding, but now again, it's off, and the hold is off, and we're enrolling. And then you have the recombinant protein matrix vaccine, which we are going to start phase 3. So what is a phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3 clinical trial? So this was all very new to me, and thanks to Dr. Jain, I've learned a lot. Phase 1 trial is when you take healthy, sorry?
Can I interrupt? Could you share your slides again? I think if the share of the slides has stopped. Are we supposed to see the blue screen with the round circle? Is that the correct one?
Yes.
Okay, that's what we are seeing. Okay, sorry about it.
Can you see this now? It says progress in COVID-19 vaccine trials.
We see the RNA, DNA, viral vector, the round circle, that slide.
This one? Is this the slide you're seeing?
The one that says 220 vaccine candidates, that one.
Okay, but on the left-hand side, you're seeing all the panel slides too?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, so let me go to the presentation. Okay, can you see the 220 vaccine candidates round circle?
Yes.
The last one is a Novavax vaccine, which is a recombinant protein vaccine, and this phase 3 is going to be done. So I was saying about phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3 clinical trials. What do they mean? Phase 1 trial is when you take healthy volunteers, and it's a very small group. You're giving the product to them, and then you're watching for side effects. It's very, very tightly controlled. It's very intense. It's a small group of people. Phase 2, you expand the size, and then you start putting mathematical models to see, okay, what is happening? Are there any side effects? What happens when you give it to diverse populations? That is phase 2. In phase 3, these are very, very large trials where they look at primary and secondary endpoints. Primary endpoint is, for example, in this case, am I going to prevent disease? The secondary endpoint can be, am I going to stop transmission? Am I going to prevent death? Because getting disease is not same as as dying, right? So that's a phase 3 trial. Phase 3 trials are very large. They have to be statistically powered to say whether it was statistically significant or not. So they're larger, they're more complicated to do than the phase 1 or phase 2 trials. So what is the progress? So we know by now that yes, the vaccines do produce immunity. So they do generate neutralizing antibody and T cell responses, and there is most of them require 2 doses. Safety, we know they are almost all of them are safe. They've all gone to phase 3. If there's a safety issue, they will stop. So what happens is, if you have, say, in phase 2, you decided to enroll, say, 1,000 patients. Somewhere midway, when you enrolled 500 patients, you stop the trial. All the data, it goes to an independent board called Data Safety Monitoring Board, and that board will decide whether it was safe. Are you reaching what you wanted? Are you getting where you wanted to get? And then they will remove the hold and say, okay, finish phase 2. So we know that it's safe. These have passed. What about the diversity? So this has become a big issue. So there was some criticism saying that many of the studies are being done in privileged populations which have access to care. They're not being done in patients with comorbid conditions. They're not being done in people of color. So we don't know what happens in them. So they said, no, if you're going to do this trial, you have to be inclusive of all the different populations occur in a community. So that's where these trials come from. We are diverse. And then transparency, that we are not going to lie to the public. Whatever is there, we're going to publish it and we're going to show it. So they're all done. Okay. So what is FDA guidance? When do you think that this vaccine is suitable for release? So the minimum efficacy is 50%. So at least you should have 50% of the patients should benefit. A lab confirmed symptomatic COVID as a primary endpoint. It means that you should stop having symptoms which are confirmed again by the lab. So not only a symptom should go away, you should not have any lab evidence of having COVID also as a primary endpoint. If you became positive and got the vaccine, or you didn't get the vaccine because you got the placebo, then you need to follow up all those positive patients, and of course enrollment I already talked about. And then you have to draw blood at frequent intervals to make sure you're getting protection. Are you making antibodies? It's not just how well you feel. You should also show that you've made the antibodies, because ultimately it's antibodies that are going to protect you.
Doctor, I'm going to have to ask you to share your screen again. Your screen is not being shared on Teams app. Yes, thank you.
Sorry about that. It's almost as if my computer is developing an antibody to this talk. It keeps phasing me out. Okay, so this one is a Pfizer vaccine. So they made mRNA vaccine, they put it in a lipid or a fat nanoparticle, and then this is the spike glycoprotein, those two spikes you see on the surface of the virus. The phase 2 study was done, and target enrollment was 30,000, went up to 44,000. And the primary efficacy was laboratory confirmed symptomatic infection. That is, how many people became symptomatic, and of those, how many people had lab confirmation of the infection. So this was the interim analysis on November 9th, and there was another interim analysis. I'll show you that in a second. So on November 9th, they recruited almost 43,500 participants. No prior COVID was a requisite. They should not ever have COVID infection in the past. 42 and half of them came from diverse backgrounds. There was a placebo arm, that means they just got normal saline, and the other arm got, the infection was randomized and blinded, means that you could be on any group. You didn't know, the person who was giving the vaccine didn't know, only the pharmacist would know at that point. And then you got 2 doses, 0 and 21 days, that means 3 weeks apart. And then out of that group, there were 164 patients who had symptoms, and 94 COVID cases, and these 94 were split equally between vaccinated and placebo indicated. They did 90% efficacy, and there were no serious safety concerns. There was an update, sorry, did I lost you again? So
No, we can hear you.
Okay, this is an update from November 18th. So when they did a second analysis, they got 170 confirmed cases, out of which 160 were observed in the placebo group. That means those people who didn't get the vaccine, versus 8 which got in the vaccine group. Efficacy was consistent. It was 95 to 94%. It was well tolerated, and a grade 3 adverse event was only fatigue and headache. So these were the 2 major adverse events which was noted. So they have applied for EUA, this is emergency use authorization, and the companies expect to produce 50 million vaccine doses by 2020 and up to 1.3 billion doses by end of 2021. What does this mean? It means that it's very encouraging, it's efficacious. The mRNA technology works because, like I said in the beginning, this was the first time we're using a commercial product. The spike protein works as an antigenic target, and it does have short-term efficacy. Why? Because we don't know. What else we don't know? We don't know other things like, will it reduce transmission? Does it reduce mild disease, moderate disease, or severe disease? We don't know that. We don't know yet what impact will be on the subgroups when it's globally challenged. Then what is going to happen after 2 months are over? Are you still going to be immune to this, or is immunity going to fail? And lastly, the big confounder is, how are you going to supply, how are you going to store, how are you going to distribution? So the Pfizer vaccine has an issue. If you want to keep it longer than 4 weeks, then it has to be stored at minus 70 degrees Fahrenheit. So it has to be very, very cold temperatures. So that is going to be a huge issue about storage for the Pfizer vaccine. The Moderna vaccine, on the other hand, this is their trial, 30,000 patients. You get 2 doses day 1 and day 29, which means that it is 4 weeks apart. You follow them for 4 days. 11,000 of these patients or the subjects were people of color. 7,000 patients or the subjects were more than 65 years of age. 5,000 candidates were less than 65, but they had all the comorbidities like diabetes, hypertension, heart disease, and so on and so forth. So out of this group, 94% out of the 30,000 group did get COVID. 90 of them who got the infection actually got the placebo, and 5 of those 95% who got COVID got the vaccine. So that is where they came up with this computation and said it is 94.5% effective. So this is what I was trying to say. The Moderna vaccine is stable at 25 degrees Fahrenheit for 5 months versus 5 days for the Pfizer vaccine. So Pfizer vaccine, if you take it out of that's really low temperatures, then you can store it only for 5 days. So the distribution has to be really, really quick. What about in Texas? So there are various phases. Phase 0 is provider recruitment registration. We're going to go into that very quickly. Phase 1 is to have a centralized distribution plan, and we're going to vaccinate select population. Who are the select people? The immediate healthcare workers, the essential workers, patients who are living or persons who are living in nursing homes and who are immunocompromised. Then we'll go to phase 2, where you have vaccine teams to go and reach critical populations where they're far out, where they cannot get access to care. Then we'll expand to broad coverage, and phase 4, which will be wide availability and boosters. And this is going to occur. This whole thing we think is going to take about a year to complete. Are we done? No way, we are not done. So it is not over yet. So what's not over yet? Other vaccines. We've talked so much about coronavirus, we kind of forgot about everything else. So I think thanks to my computer issues, we are running a little bit short in time. So I'll quickly go through the other vaccines which are really, really important. So diphtheria, tetanus, and cellular pertussis, which is diphtheria, tetanus, and whooping cough. These diseases are there, and they're, as I showed you before, they're highly effective vaccines for that. So this is something we should get. All adolescents and adults up to age of 64 should get the DTaP vaccine. If you're more than 64, they're not giving the pertussis vaccine unless you've never had whooping cough or you have no antibodies to it. And otherwise, you should at least get diphtheria and tetanus as your booster. And then you can give it with the meningitis vaccine. And of course, you can give it adults if they've never had diphtheria or tetanus vaccines in the past, especially if they're traveling. Then the MMR vaccine, this is a live vaccine, so be careful. So there will be certain people who cannot get this live vaccine, so be careful. And it's the people who should get it are going to be your healthcare workers, international travelers, and students who are post-high school. Usually, if you're born before 1957, you're considered to be immune, but you should always ask to have immunity or test them for antibodies and give it to all the unvaccinated healthcare workers. And during an outbreak, if there's an outbreak of the MMR, which has occurred here in this country, you should always give a second dose to anyone who says they've got only 1 dose in the past. Hepatitis A, very, very important. I alluded to this. It's a worldwide disease and it's highly immunogenic. All of us should get the hepatitis A vaccine if you don't have antibodies. We talked about this. Mortality is high. It increases with age. So older you are and you get hepatitis A, the sicker you're going to get. So pictorial graph showing where all the hepatitis A is. The ones in the darker areas is all hepatitis A. So all the destination spots in Europe, Africa, South America, even Greenland, surprisingly, is very high in hepatitis A, and of course, the Indian subcontinent. Hepatitis B is greater risk than HIV. Please remember that, and it is always related to risk behavior. It's not destination specific, and this vaccine should be offered definitely to all healthcare workers as a part of the immunization program. for all the young people. So most people nowadays should be immunized and have immunity to hepatitis B. This is another picture, a very similar distribution of hepatitis A, only that in hepatitis B, where you saw hepatitis A not very common in North America, now hepatitis B is very common in Canada. This is a twin risk vaccine, which is hepatitis A and B combined vaccine, highly immunogenic. Meningococcal vaccine. This is an example of a required vaccine where if you're traveling to certain parts of the Africa or you're going to Hajj in the Middle East, you do need to have this proof of meningococcal vaccine. Otherwise, you will. It is in Africa they won't prevent you, but you should get it. Otherwise, you're going to get this infection, very high mortality rate. And if you're going to Hajj, they won't let you go to Hajj unless you show them the proof of this vaccine. The meningococcal meningitis is transmitted by aerosol route, so close contact in overcrowded areas where you can get into serious trouble with this. Meningococcal vaccines are highly effective, well tolerated. It's an intramuscular injection, and you can get a booster dose 3 to 5 years after 5 years. So these are risk assessment, itinerary style of travel, and past medical history. All these vaccines. The polio vaccine is again live and kill. We are preferring the kill vaccine. Rabies, of course, is only very specific. If you're going into that, if you're a veterinarian or you get bitten, you should definitely get the vaccine. And cholera vaccine, I talked about. I didn't talk about this. It's not a very effective vaccine, but if there's an outbreak of cholera, then you should, and you're going in there as a healthcare worker, you should probably get the vaccine. So I will breeze through the slide. Most of it we already talked about. It's just there for if anybody wants to save these and take them with them, they're more than welcome to. The typhoid fever we talked about. The two kinds of vaccines are available. One is a live vaccine, one is an injectable vaccine. The live vaccine has been maintained in the cold chains, but it's more immunogenic. So I do recommend this. I have taken it myself. This is where the typhoid vaccine preventable disease is there. Europe is moderate risk, but very high risk in Indian subcontinent, also Java, Sumatra, and all Indonesia, those islands, very high risk to get typhoid. We talked about this. Food and water precautions extremely important. Typhoid is very important because it has got fluoroquinolone resistance. So many of the persons who go, you can't take levaquin, it's resistant, so it's become a big issue now. So this is my favorite slide. This is, I alluded to this slide in my previous talk. This is moti. So last time when I gave this talk, I was wondering why most dogs in India are called moti, and I did some looking up on this. Actually, this word moti, I think it was a dog in this movie called Teri Meherbaniya, and this was a very loyal dog, and Jackie Shroff had it, and the main lead actor dies, but this dog protects him. But the dogs which you see on the street, please don't pet them, especially if you're in India, because the largest cohort of rabies in the world occurs from the Indian subcontinent. So if you get bitten by a dog, you just have to take the rabies vaccine. So be careful when you're traveling. No matter how cute the dog is, don't go and pet it because the dog could snap and bite you. So it's an invariably fatal disease, and that is why we have to be very careful. Monkeys can carry the rabies virus. Of course, the monkey bite can carry another deadly disease called herpes simiae, but the recommendation is that if you get bitten by a monkey in India, you probably should get the rabies vaccine also. So these are some indication: occupation, hobbies, long-term travelers, and children can often be at risk, right? Because children often, oh, look at a cute dog, they go pet it and get bitten in the bargain. The yellow fever vaccine, this I put up this slide just because travel is very common. Unfortunately, now we are in a state of pandemics. Nobody's going anywhere, especially to Peru, where there's a huge outbreak of the coronavirus. And Machu Picchu is a favorite destination for travelers. This is another live vaccine, so you have to be careful because you can get serious side effects. Though it's very rare, it occurs. It's a live vaccine. It's 100% immunogenic. So if you get it, you will be immunogenic to it. And these are the areas in South America and also in Africa where there is yellow fever. India, if you go to India from a stay in Argentina or Peru, they can refuse your entry because India is very scared because we have the vector, for the mosquito vector for the yellow fever. We don't have yellow fever in India. It's quite a mystery. They think the dengue fever, which occurs, somehow interacts with the virus, and that's why we don't have the yellow fever virus. So in the Indian health authorities are very, very particular about this. Japanese viral encephalitis is sort of because there was a huge outbreak in India at some point. That's why I put this up. Typically, it occurs. It's very rare. You have to work in the rice fields, or you have to be a veterinarian to get this vaccination. 3-dose vaccine series. So this is for COVID, but it's all for everything, right? You will minimize the chance for exposure. You should adhere to standard contact and airborne precautions, including the use of eye protection. You must manage visitor access, not only in a facility, in your home too. So please, Thanksgiving is coming up. I would implore you not to have large gatherings. Please have a visitor access restriction. Engineering controls you can't do at home, but you certainly can keep the windows open and meet outside if you do have to meet. And you definitely have to isolate your sick and loved ones who are ill and reduce exposure. And of course, the healthcare personnel who really should not be coming to work if they are sick. And of course, you have to train and educate healthcare personnel. We are human beings, though I may be healthcare workers. I do have my flaws. I may forget to put on my shield. I've done it and caught myself just in time, or have been tapped on the shoulder by a nurse who said, "Doc, where is your shield?" And I've run back into my safe area and put the shield on. So it's something we need day-to-day reinforcement of a treatment. And of course, we have to report amongst ourselves when we see that. Don't hide it, don't sweep it in the carpet. This, I believe, this is very common, especially in developing nations where it's if you get COVID, you're isolated, they'll come and put a tape around your house. So people are not reporting. But in the bigger picture, you should report. We need to have a good control. And what does the future look for? We don't know. Look at this. We have a bad. Then we have these viruses. Then we've got these viruses multiplied. Then they crossed over into the reservoir. Then they crossed over human beings. Is this going to happen again? I'm sure it's going to happen again. We don't know. So we just have to be careful and take all the travel precautions we can, how best we can. And lastly, acknowledgements. I would like to acknowledge my professor, Dr. Joe Wheat, who fostered my interest in endemic fungal infections. Great man. He's a discoverer of histoplasmosis antigen. Dr. Trish Pearl, who is the chief of infectious diseases, who very cheerfully and gladly gave me many of the slides and allowed me to plagiarize some of her slides. Dr. Jane, for whom I am totally indebted to, this journey has been very exciting. She's one of the most compassionate and ardent researchers I ever had the fortune to work with. She works 80+ hours a week, never shows signs of strain or fatigue. And then we have Dr. Brad Cottrell, who is the program director of infectious diseases with UT Southwestern for the fellowship program. Another amazing man who can just churn out papers, read papers at an alarming speed. And I'm totally humbled to work with all these great people who have enriched my journey in infectious disease. And lastly, friends, this is my family, my 2 sons, my wife, and happy Thanksgiving. Be safe, and I'll be happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Dr. Kerala. That was a wonderful presentation, very detailed and truly eye-opening. We will now dive into Q&A. The first question is, are recombinant vaccines appropriate for those who believe in the non-violence lifestyle, who do not want egg-based, gelatin, or other animal byproducts?
Yes, absolutely. So depends on the present mRNA vaccine. The present mRNA vaccine are totally synthetic vaccines. So yes, that will be fine for the people who believe that there should be no harm done to your fellow species. Yes, the mRNA vaccines, absolutely yes.
Thank you. Moving on to the next question. If we are giving mRNA, does it mean that it will take longer for the body to develop protection versus if we could give the spike protein directly as a vaccine?
Right. So if you give the protein, it's very similar to giving an antigen, a part of a virus, right? So it will take longer if you give the protein rather than give the mRNA, because mRNA is a blueprint, so cell can immediately get it. Whereas when you have a spike protein, the antigens presenting cells have to recognize the protein first, then translate that into an mRNA, and then they have to make a blueprint of mRNA. So that transmission is avoided.
Okay, great. The next question is, what are the common side effects of vaccines?
So the common side effects are usually the soreness at that site. It's very common. Then you can have a low-grade fever. And oftentimes I'm faced with this dilemma where a patient tells me, Doc, the influenza vaccine I got last year made me so sick. I had a fever for 2 days. Then I ask the next question, if you get a live vaccine or you got an inactivated vaccine. And when they say inactivated vaccine, I tell them, look, if you got a low-grade fever, it's possible that your body is actually reacting to the components of the vaccine, and perhaps it's making antibodies, and that's why you're going to have the low-grade fever. Then, of course, you have some serious side effects because your body can recognize these proteins as foreign, mount an immune response, in the process, make antibodies which can cause paralysis, and that's the other end of the spectrum where you can get the Guillain-Barré syndrome. So you go from a relatively innocuous pain at the site all the way to the Guillain-Barré syndrome. Fortunately, it's not at the south end of the spectrum. It's always the mild innocuous side effects of the vaccine: swelling, pain, tenderness, redness, warm, so on and so forth.
Okay, moving on to the next question. So coming back to the COVID-19 vaccine, would someone who had COVID-19 and recovered still need to get vaccinated?
Yes, I would, because we don't know how long that immunity is going to last. The studies have shown that definitely 60 days. There have been, I think, 3 cases reported so far. One case actually in United States, when they actually cloned the virus, showed that that it was a true reinfection and not just recurrence of the symptoms. So if you remember that slide, I put that question mark. What will happen after 60 days? We don't know. So that is why I would recommend getting the vaccine, unless you are it's within the 4-week of recovery where we don't know. And of course, if you are just recovering, I think they are going to, when they ration the vaccine, I hate to use that word, let me use a better word, when they decide who's the appropriate person to get the vaccine, in that case, you may not be the first person to get it. It probably will go to somebody who's with a higher risk of getting it, who has no evidence of any immunity of any kind.
Okay. Next question. Can you tell us about the shingles vaccine? Who should take it, and if it is recommended for someone who already had shingles?
Yes. So the shingles immunity falls. The immunity to the varicella virus or the chickenpox virus actually falls as you grow older. So there are 2 kinds of the shingles vaccine. One is the live vaccine. The other one is the recombinant vaccine. Live vaccine is a live vaccine, so you can have side effects, and it's not recommended for people with those immunocompromised conditions which I had alluded to. The recombinant vaccine is beneficial, and you should get it. The maximum efficacy is when you give it between the ages of 50 and 65. Beyond 65, we don't know yet, because that was not the population where it was extensively studied yet, but that's a vaccine which one should probably take it. I know I'm going to take it when I touch 60, which is not very far away. So I think I will get the vaccine.
Okay, great. The next question is, here is a person who's 67 years old, and he hasn't taken vaccination before, and he wants to know if Pneumovax would be okay for him.
Yes. So yes, they should take the Pneumovax. They should take the 2 series, get the Prevnar, and then get the pneumococcal vaccine in tandem. If not, at least take the PPSV23 vaccine. That's what I would recommend.
Okay, moving on to the next question. I'm talking from personal experience here. Why do we sometimes get the flu even though we have taken the vaccine?
So if you remember that when I talked about those strains which we talked about, that sometimes you can get the vaccine wrong because that may not be the predominantly circulating flu. So that could possibly happen. Number one, you didn't get your vaccine was not matched to the strain you got. That is one possibility. The second possibility is that your body, for whatever reason, did not make enough body antibodies to the vaccine you got. It's kind of impossible to predict how much antibody response each individual can make. You can make a broad generalization, but all of us are so different in our immune responses that it's kind of really crazy. Somebody can make a huge antibody response, some people can make no antibody response also. I have several patients in my practice and I've seen this hepatitis B over and over again, whereas you give one dose and a person is already immune, and their patients have given 2 cycles of 3 doses each and still there is a 0 response. So probably one of those things might have happened.
Okay. So talking about immunity, now if we take the COVID-19 vaccine, is it something that we would have to take annually like the flu, or would it be like a one-time vaccine?
We don't know yet. We don't know yet because it's such a novel thing. So, and we don't even know what will happen. Do you need a booster or not? If you remember that slide, I put a question mark at the booster. That's the reason why I put a question mark. We don't know whether a booster would be 3 months, 6 months, 1 year. Is the virus going to mutate? Is it going to change? Is it going to get new antigenic properties? We don't know the answers yet. It is so uncertain. And again, I apologize. I became quite emotional when I was talking because it's a devastating disease. I've seen whole families wiped out by this disease. If we are 9 months down the road, we have 250,000 people die here. So it is so uncharted. It's very disheartening sometimes that I can't give anybody the answers. So unfortunately, this is one of those areas where I really can't give you the answers.
Thank you so much. And next question is, can you comment on vaccinations while on immunosuppressive medications?
Yes. So let me go back to this slide actually. So live vaccines, as a rule, you have to be careful when you give immunosuppressed people. That doesn't mean you can't get any live vaccines. There are certain vaccines, risk versus benefit before you give to the immunosuppressed. So, like for example, the shingles vaccine, which is the zoster live vaccine, is on the whole not recommended to give to severely immunosuppressed people because it is a truly live vaccine. MMR is another vaccine which you have to be very, very careful because it's not just the immunity, it also depends on the degree of your immune suppression. So, for example, if you have HIV positive individual who has taken medications, his T cell count is more than 500, and then you want to consider giving a live vaccine, then yes, that person probably can get a live vaccine. But again, you have to see the risk benefit. What is his chance of getting the disease? What is his chance of not getting the disease? Can we not give the person who's infected, who's at a risk of getting infection, but vaccinate everybody else around him to give them? Those are all the questions which come into play, and this has to be made only on a case-to-case basis. There's really no one size that fits all situation here.
Okay. The next question is, do we need a prescription to get any of these, routine vaccines?
The influenza vaccines, no. You can go to a CVS pharmacy and get the influenza vaccine. The pneumococcal vaccine and the Tdap vaccine, you don't need a prescription. The MMR vaccine, certain states require to get a prescription, some they don't. The zoster vaccine is very expensive, so it's better to get a prescription, otherwise you could be denied payment, otherwise you can get it. The hepatitis A and B vaccine in state of Texas, I understand you can get it. Meningococcal vaccine, I'm really not sure. I think this vaccine you need a prescription. If anybody wants to email me, satish.mocherla@upsouthwestern.edu, I can find out and let the person know.
Okay, great. I think we have time for just one last question, and The question is the Tdap vaccine taken annually?
No. You
No.
don't take an annually.
Okay, perfect. I think that's all we had time for today. And so with that, that brings us to the end of our session. On behalf of JKYog and Radhakrishna Temple, I would like to express our appreciation to Dr. Mochella for being here today, despite his very busy schedule, and for giving us an insightful and informative presentation on the COVID-19 vaccine and other recommended immunizations for adults. Thank you so much, Doctor. That was indeed very, very helpful. And thank you all for tuning in. Please plan to tune in to our next webinar on Friday, the December 4th. And also, JKYog offers programs for all ages. So please do check out our website. And it's jkyog.org or radhakrishnatemple.net. Thank you again and have a great weekend. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Happy Thanksgiving. Safe Thanksgiving.